Hello, welcome to Season 11 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. This season, in each episode, we will not both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about it later. We have 10 previous seasons of doing exactly that, and it's time for something new. This season, each episode will focus on a larger horror topic, trend, or maybe even rumor. We'll speculate about upcoming movies, debate genre definitions, and do our best to apply the perspective of two people who have watched way too many horror movies to different types of horror media. Thanks for coming along for the ride. All right, so here we are, another episode in Season 11 where we're changing things up, doing things different. This week we did not both watch a movie to talk about, but rather we each did a little bit of investigating and a little bit of reflecting and decided we wanted to talk about our experiences and what we learned and what we have thought about monster movies.
Monster movies.
And what we kind of earlier in this season talked about horror subgenres, and that's kind of a thing that we're going to keep coming back to. And I think that the idea of the monster movie is a very enduring one. And I think that it's really hard to think about, I guess, like the legacy of horror movies without thinking about and talking about monster movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I feel like the OG. Like, not even before movies came out, like monsters, like in Native American culture, they even have their monsters. So we got to start here.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think also, too, when I think about classic horror, you know, sort of the universal monsters are some of the first things that come to mind for me.
Yeah.
And over time, really, those have had such a lasting impact. And if you think about new movies, you know, a lot of the stuff is still kind of based on things from that era. And I am just excited to talk with you about some of the things that have made that so enduring and such a staple for horror in general.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to be able to talk about something that I think we all are familiar with. Like it's hard to not be familiar with it just with how, I mean, it's in video games. I mean, it's all over the place. Monster movies. There's cereal with monsters on them.
Yeah, and next week when we talk about astrophysics, it will be much less relatable.
That's true. You know, I do like astrophysics conversation.
Indeed. But in the meantime, I was led to believe that you might have done a little reading on monster movies and might have some fun facts to share with us.
I did and do. And also, don't even know what astrophysics is. Just thought I'd come clean because I'm trying not to be a liar. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came out in 1931. I'd consider that a monster movie. Maybe half of the time.
That's pretty good.
It was the first ever horror film. Oh, let me say that again. It was the first horror film ever to win an Academy Award. Frederick March won the Oscar for Best Actor for his portrayal of the titular character Dr. Jekyll. That's pretty interesting. That came out in 1931, too. Actually, I find that not that interesting. 1931's early on. Like, if it was the 70s, then that'd be a huge feat, right? This is more just saying this is the first one. I'm just having a conversation with myself. In The Creature from the Black Lagoon, that came out in 1954, the creature's appearance was based on an old 17th century woodcuts of two bizarre creatures called the Sea Monk and Sea Bishop. The creature's final head design was based off of that of the Sea Monk. We kind of talked about that a little bit in what we did, Creature from the Black Lagoon. I just threw it back in. So I liked it. Hey, how much would you say a poster for The Mummy, 1932, the original Mummy, went for at an auction? Would you say plus or minus $453,500?
I'd say right on the money.
You're damn right, my dude. So that was the highest holds the record for the most money paid for a movie poster at an auction. Was the original Mummy poster. 1932, sold for $453,500, dude. So, after World War I, Germany developed a taste for movies that looked unrealistic on purpose. We watched a couple of those in the 100 Years of Horror, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1919 is when it came out. Basically, we can thank the Germans for a lot of horror movies. These films were part of a broader term called German Expressionist Art Movement. That's where we got the stories like the 1927 sci-fi film Metropolis. Cinematographer Karl Freund later went on Stateside and lent his services on Dracula. He directed The Mummy with Boris Karloff, a Boris Karloff vehicle, that's what they call it, for the studio. Critics noted that expressionist undertones of both movies, like their German predecessors, they used deep shadows to help set the mood. And the last fact that I have about monster movies, it's alive! It's alive! You remember that saying from Frankenstein?
Indeed.
Do you know what the original quote was supposed to be? It's alive, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
Ooh,
that got
controversial.
Cut. It got cut. I just thought this was funny. I think that's why I had it. It got cut because of censorship.
Like, that was the thing that put it over the top.
Yeah. And it's like, oh wow, to say now I know what it feels like to be God. It's not saying now I know what it feels like. No, it's saying that. Yeah. Anyways, it's pretty
just
interesting.
Funny to me because like the guy is out like stealing corpses and sewing their parts together, and like that's totally fine. But
yeah. But you do not know what it feels like to be God.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what they decided to cut down on. You know why? Censorship can suck my butt, Daniel. I've been censored a lot lately.
You have no idea how much I have to censor you when I edit this podcast.
I know.
It's insane.
I just can't stop, dude.
What makes it through is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
The things only we get to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, so that's interesting stuff. I like that you kind of look through the historical aspect on it because I want to get into some of that as we go along as well. But I did a little bit of reading for this week about types of fear. So I was kind of curious, like, what is the fear of monsters? Like, have people studied that? Like, is that a thing? The answer is yes.
Ooh.
Terraphobia is the fear of monsters. And most of what I came up with on that was really geared towards like how do you get past it because it's a fake thing. So a lot of times it was like, based on your upbringing or your culture or your religious beliefs, you may have in your mind that there are these creatures out there that are coming after you. And it really was interesting to me because it's like defined as the fear of monsters, but a lot of what I read about it was talking more about, like witches or things that we would typically call like a different type of horror maybe. But a lot of it, like I said, was mostly around ways to help people get past that. And so like coping mechanisms for kids with terraphobia or with adults, a lot of times, if it's something real, like a spider or something, like just exposure to it or learning more about it would a lot of times be like the recommended course of action. And I thought that was really interesting because I think that's a thing that works well with horror movies in that a lot of times they sort of creatively introduce a monster that you don't have any way of knowing more about. So it's like Frankenstein's monster. Well, you can't go in 1931. You couldn't go read a book about, other than the book it was based on. So that's a bad example. But you couldn't go, like, study scientifically what Frankenstein monsters were and were capable of, and you couldn't go see one and interact with it and stuff. It draws heavily on your imagination, right?
Yeah.
And so that I thought was really interesting as a thing that horror movies do, is they basically introduce you to a thing that is an unknown to you. And because of that, you're just sort of deeply, almost more or as scared by your own imagination as you are by anything else.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why books can definitely be a little bit more scarier than real life in a way, because your imagination just goes with it, or why books can be better than, film adaptations and stuff, because your mind messes with you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if, like, terraphobia, though, that's just something that's kind of like ingrained in us, and I wonder if it's because of, like, our Neanderthal days when there was obviously no books, and it was like, don't go out there in the dark because something crazy is going to happen. More likely, probably a bear attack or something. Maybe a woolly mammoth. Those are terrifying, I've heard. But I wonder if it's like ingrained in us, because, like, there's a phobia out there called trypophobia or something. It's like the fear of, like, cluster of circle dots and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they say that that's, like, from our ancestors, like, oh, don't eat anything that looks like that because it'll kill you. Oh. And so I bet
So you're saying, like, it sort of evolved with humanity as a survival mechanism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Funny you should mention that.
Uh-oh.
Because as I was reading about terraphobia, it was mostly just talking about ways to, like, get past it. But I kind of came back to that idea of it really being not so much monsters, I guess, is the main thing that's scary to people as it is the unknown. And so I started reading about fear of the unknown, which, as most people are aware, is called xenophobia. And a lot of times that gets used for this. It has certain connotations with it, but the root of the word is fear of the unknown. And some of the things I was reading about it called it the fundamental fear, the most basic fear that humans have, and it sort of drives most other things. And I thought that was a really interesting take, and that would be very compatible with your view of it being sort of almost part of the survival mechanism baked into the human psyche. And so in looking back through all of these movies that we've watched over the last 10 seasons, I think that definitely the more effective ones are the ones that play into that more. And my example point for that is, can you think of anything less scary than in a horror movie when you finally get to see the monster and you can immediately tell that it's just like a crappy rubber mask?
Right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. And a big pet peeve of mine.
But that's the exact moment when it goes from being an unknown to being a known, like a thing that you can place in your mind that you can explain to yourself, Mm-hmm. And that seems like super powerful, that movies can overwrite that.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, because I know I probably have said it hundreds of times on the podcast. It's like, that's the point where it's like no longer scary. My imagination does wonders. Let's just leave it like that.
Yeah, but what's really cool to me about horror movies is that a lot of times, even though we know it's just some people with cameras and some people who are being filmed, and it's all just special effects and Hollywood magic, we can still get pulled into it. Mm-hmm. We can still live that illusion that we're in that scenario, or we can feel that same, like, emotional response that we would to something that is like actual danger. And I think that's really like the art of horror. And I think that's one reason monster movies work so well, is because they really do just kind of symbolize what the unknown is.
Yeah. 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 And I think the other thing that it allows you to do is allows you to open up your imagination as a creator of it, and almost maybe tie in some other phobias into a monster. Maybe if they look gross, or fear of fish or something, and you got this fish monster, whatever, just use it as an example. It allows them to do that, and just from the creative side, like, it's almost like unlimited, right? You can make any monster. I mean, we've seen so many different types of monsters over the years, just throughout the horror movies in general, not even for the podcast, just in general. It's like, who would have thought, like, Godzilla, how do you come up with that, and how do you come up with Frankenstein? I don't know, but I'm glad they did.
Yeah.
I like the creative freedom, because no one says what a monster has to be a monster. It's just what it is to you, in a way, that you're trying to put on film.
Yeah. Well, and looking back through our movies, I kind of went, the episodes that we've done in the past, I kind of went through and ordered them by date. And it was interesting to me how culture and technology, it seems like, have a big impact on, like, the types of movies being made. So if we look at, like, the 20s with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, those were really not relying on strong narratives to drive them, so much as they were kind of the striking visuals. And I think that, we even talked about it when we were doing those episodes. Well, and I guess you could say the same about some of the early 30s stuff as well, but it really was just the situation that it created, the visuals that it created, and was really almost more about kind of like the mood and tone of the movie than it was about anything else. And I feel like that from the perspective of, like, drawing on the unknown, that was even more effective for those. Like I found those to be much more scary than, like, Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein or Wolfman or anything like that were more, kind of had more of a story and a little more technology in how it was presented, just because, like, that Nosferatu vampire in that grainy black and white looking directly at you was just chilling, because it's unlike anything you see day to day.
Yeah, I would almost say, like, Nosferatu is almost like was like a monster movie that had magic tied to it too. So, like, they did things like when he's, comes straight up from the coffin and stuff, and you're just like, how, like, even still, like, I'm sure we can read, and I think it was even a fact in Nosferatu, but I don't remember. It's like, how did they do that? Like, and especially back then, when movie tricks and everything, they were just figuring out at the time.
Yeah.
It's definitely, like, that adds to the unknown, with things like that. But yeah, that's a good point, because, like, the visuals of like the sort of special effects that they were able to pull off, that wasn't stuff people had seen a billion times already. Like, that was new and innovative, and people went from seeing things happening in the real world to then seeing things happen on the screen that couldn't happen in the real world for the first time. And that's, like, mind-blowing, right? Yeah. And you gotta think too, like, stage shows and everything were super popular, especially back in the day. I'm not saying monster movies don't exist nowadays, but just back in the day. And I think one of the reasons why people were tied to is because magic shows also were, really big back then too. I mean, you think of, like, Harry Houdini, like, he had this lore on him that he was, just a almost like a monster. He could do magic, which is huge. This big, crazy thing. So
Wait,
why not tie it into movies?
Do you mean to tell me there was a famous wizard named Harry?
Wait a minute.
But yeah, no, I agree with you for sure.
I'm
like the
sure
idea.
Harry Houdini's first name was Hendrix. I'm just guessing.
Well, was his last name Potter?
No.
Hendrix Potter, the famous
it was
wizard.
Potterfield. Potterfield. Wait a minute. What if that's how we figured out he was copying off?
Life is just one continuous circle with glitches in the Matrix.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, I think that's a good point, right? Like the visuals of it and stuff is interesting, and that's a big part of selling it too. And that doesn't always have to be something that holds up over time. It just has to be effective in the time when it's released.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like, if you're going to make, when they made movies, like, I feel like anytime you make movies, you think, okay, say you make it at, let's say 40 years old. You're the producer or whatever. It's like, I'm not gonna, like, I don't need this. It'd be cool if it lasts a lifetime, but I'm looking to make money now.
Trying to get paid.
Mm-hmm. Trying to get that money. Trying to get that Skrilla scratch. So I definitely see, why they would, why they'd add it. I don't know if anyone can ever come up with an answer why something lasts as long as it has, but like, there's definitely, when it comes to monster movies, there's definitely, like, I feel like the sweet spot, of like the classics. And now monster movies, personally, there are definitely monster movie horror movies coming out nowadays, but I feel like it's almost turned more into action. Like, action movies have taken over the monster field in a way. So we're gonna go out and fight this big old shark, or whatever the case is, and it's more action than actually trying to scare you.
Yeah, well, I think they kind of go more for like the intensity of it.
Yeah,
the action adventure piece for sure. But yeah, in kind of going back to that list, the next piece that stood out to me was in the 50s, where we had like The Thing from Another World and Them and The Creature from the Black Lagoon and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and those all seem much more focused on kind of technology and whether that be like space and spaceships and the possibility of meeting other life forms, or if it was the nuclear age. But those were all things that I feel like at the time felt very powerful, but also very unknown. I mean, like, we were still real early on in what we knew about a lot of those things scientifically. And so I think they were like there in culture, and those movies sort of capitalized on, well, what if these things that are so new and exciting turned out to be bad for us? And I think that was kind of a powerful thing at the time.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I think it really hit what you were talking about in the previous one about making movies about what's current. And if you do think about 50s, space race and all that going on. And so as horror filmmakers, let's capitalize on the moment. And I really like that, because I feel like that was the dawn of the space age monsters, aliens.
Yeah. Well, and it's also just using the stuff that people are already thinking about and then using it against them. Yeah. And I applaud that.
Definitely. I actually support that. I'm pretty sure that's in The Art of War. Haven't read it, but I just assume.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, then another kind of section was in the 80s, and that's where there were things like The Evil Dead, The Thing, The Fly, Hellraiser, The Blob. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with those, it was at a time where the special effects technology, like the practical effects technology, allowed you to pull off a lot of just like fairly realistic and super disturbing imagery. And I think that those movies really embraced that and relied on that. Those movies weren't focused on, oh yeah, there's this bigger thing that society is obsessed with that we're trying to tap into. It was almost more just like, we're going to show you visuals unlike anything you've ever seen before, and you're going to have a hard time taking yourself out of the moment because it doesn't look fake to you compared to other things you've seen on TV.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the 80s was definitely a good time too.
I love that practical effects stuff, man. Like we've talked about that a lot. Like, it's just so much more convincing to me than anything that's CGI.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt, because I would rather them give it a shot and maybe fall a little short than like just go straight CGI, especially like back then, where it was just starting, I feel like. But yeah, just give it a try. We're making a horror film about a guy who turns into a fly. Yeah. Let's go with realistic, makeup.
And he's kind of falling apart.
Yeah. And the fact that quality of makeup has, got better, I assume multiple or more people were dying less from like the lead makeup and stuff that they were using.
I would hope.
Yeah. And so it's like, hey, now's the time. Let's just do it.
Yeah. Well, and I realized too, I neglected to talk about a thing I wanted to. With the 50s, you were talking about it being sort of the sci-fi horror and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think was kind of a key point too, where that really became its own distinct kind of sub-genre of like alien horror movies.
Yeah.
Or sci-fi horror movies. And then, with them, that kind of started to be like the giant monster. And I know there were other examples of that, but it's interesting kind of looking back through these movies through history, the way that they've sort of kind of grown off onto their own branches along the way. And I think that, things like even body horror, for example, like that really got exemplified in the 80s when they were using the special effects technology to do those more like visual disturbing things to, humans.
Yeah, and I kind of think that it would be... Here's my idea for a future horror film. And listen, I know we got a lot of people who make horror films listening to this podcast. So listen up. Here's a free idea. They should make a modern horror film, but look like it's from the 50s.
Oh, I'm in.
I just think, yeah, like I would 100% watch it. Like, I wonder how long until we start getting like movies kind of like that. Kind of like there was a movie called Pleasantville, and it was like black and white, and like that, but like all black and white and all like trying to be like a 50s style horror film. I just think it'd be amazing just to see like the take that we can have now on it, and see how that goes.
Yeah, that's I would be so here for all of that. I would love it if they could do some of those in like drive-in movies and stuff too. You know what I mean? Like do some things that are very like specific to the experience from watching them at that time too.
Yeah.
I'm all about that life.
Dude, I wish I just had like unlimited funds because I would produce this in a heartbeat. I think this is a brilliant idea.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I bought like, I don't know, 1 billion Dogecoins. Mm-hmm. And so if all of our listeners can shoot that to the moon, we'll have money to do whatever we want.
I like it. Okay.
I'm currently down about $100,000.
Oh, God.
But we just need to turn it around.
like it. We should title this episode, Daniel Discovers Cryptocurrency.
It's called Stonks Don't Always Go Up.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty sweet. But I do like what you talked about though, like starting from the very beginning of like the phobia itself, why we're interested, because that's something that we've talked about. Like we want to know why some of these things. That's how that's how we, you and I specifically kind of work. If we know how or why, then we feel like we got a better understanding. And I like to make the jokes about like, oh, I can't believe they passed out back then. But, in talking, like what you were talking about earlier of like, they didn't have the books. I mean, even if there were books about it, you can't tell me that it was easier to find books back then than it was now. Like, libraries have limited quantity. And so, like, the people are going and watching things. And honestly, believing everything that they see on the screen, and if they're told it's a true story, something like that, then they're going to believe it. So it's like, part of me, like, wishes I could go back and just see what it'd be like then. This is the time to be alive for the record. But that would just be awesome to see, and just get a real taste of like, I want to see if they actually were freaked out. I do think they were after talking about like the terraphobia and stuff like that and the explanation of that. So you did a really good job on this podcast. I just thought I'd tell you.
Well, thanks. Real quick before we get done, I had a couple of things that I wanted to run by you, and I don't really have an answer in my mind yet. I was just kind of curious to hear your take. Mm-hmm. What do you think about a movie like Backcountry? Like, would you call that a monster movie? Because I don't know what else you would call it. And it would be easy to lump it in with like Jaws or The Birds, mm-hmm. which I think are monster movies, maybe. But with Backcountry, it was just kind of like they were camping where they shouldn't have been, and then they got attacked by bears. But that's like a very realistic thing that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole theory about like monster movies being effective because it's the unknown kind of just completely falls apart on that one. Like that was the one going back through the list where I was just like, oh,
Right.
maybe there's a different type of thing here that I haven't quite figured out yet.
Well, Backcountry is, I think we were talking, I think it was survival horror. And that's like a whole, and the reason why I say it was just a movie on survival. Like, because chances are if you're in the middle of the woods in, I don't know where they were at, Canada or wherever, like there's a chance that you're going to run into an animal that's going to kill you, now maybe not on like your hike out of like Osage Hills or something, but like there's still a chance that you could get lost and that you could get, attacked. And that's why I recommend a couple books for the record on survival horror. One's called Shelters, Shacks, and Shanties. Definitely a good book. You should read it. But I would say survival. I struggle with animals because it's known. No matter what, a bear is a bear. Is a bear. You know what I mean? A shark's a shark. But like you could have like Bigfoot that's in the woods. That's a monster. Potentially, I've never met him. He could be a good guy.
I was gonna say, if you just gave him a chance.
Yeah, I know that was my bad.
No,
but I would say survival. I don't think it's categorized in this. I think when we're talking monsters, at least I'm gonna speak for both of us because that's what I do. I would say that we're talking, Frankenstein's and Mummy and the Fly, things like that are
Pumpkinhead.
Yes.
Jeepers Creepers.
Exactly.
Like yeah. No, I'm with you. The other one though, that was like kind of my counterexample was like with the birds, because with that, it felt very much like they were like surrounding and attacking. Like the birds almost to me feels like kind of, like a precursor to some, like vampire, or not, damn it, like a precursor to like your classic zombie movie, right? Where like the people are stuck inside the house and there's the swarm outside and they're scared to go out and they can only move at certain times. So to me, it was almost like the birds collectively, like they had this hive mind and that was the monster in that movie. So I can see where like there's animals, but there's like that other element. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if the creature is like actively killing,
see what I mean?
Actively
It's
trying
hard
to kill you. Yeah, if it's like actively trying, but I don't know if I would consider Birds a monster movie personally. I would categorize in Jaws. I mean, like whatever Jaws is that one?
Yeah.
Nature horror. That's what we'll call it.
Yeah,
nature.
So then the last thing I wanted to bring up is actually, I almost feel like a kind of an uncomfortable discussion. And that is the movie Freaks. And I feel like that movie at the time in 1932 would most definitely have been classified as a monster movie. But I feel like in 2022, that movie is not a monster movie.
It's just based off real life in California or something.
Well, I was just going to say it's just a movie about like people
From
with
South
either
Dakota.
disabilities or like malformities.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because I don't think that movie would get made today. And I think that almost goes along a little bit with the theory of like fear of the unknown being a compelling thing in monster movies. Because in 2022, like we're post ADA, like the internet is real. More people live longer with, maybe non-standard conditions. And so I think that it's not as much of an unknown thing that like some people get born without legs or something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, in the early 30s, didn't have a lot of internet going around. A lot of people so it's almost like the treatment of the people in society and society's awareness of the condition maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But now that has changed a lot, like that movie doesn't feel as scary from the perspective of it being a thing of the unknown, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I think this is a good one that definitely has me pretty stumped on what it would be. if we're gonna call the form people that kill monster film, then you gotta categorize, The Hills Have Eyes, like those types too. Maybe even, in a way, Leatherface or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe. I don't know. It definitely wouldn't be made, understandably so, but that's definitely a good point. I'd rather talk about why bears aren't considered monsters, though. That's my expertise.
It's just because you haven't gotten to know them.
All bears can go to hell. Okay?
Well, now we're going to lose our whole bear audience. So what are we even doing here?
You're right.
Are there bears in Australia?
No, scientifically proven they never they never learn how to swim.
Okay. Screw them then. I don't need them. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
All bears can go to hell.